Welcome to the Mythicist Milwaukee Show podcast. Before we get started, we'd like to extend special thanks to all the sponsors of the Myth Information Conference 3 coming up on October 21st at historic Turner Hall in Milwaukee. Freedom from Religion Foundation, the Sophia Wolf Quadracci Memorial Fund for Stem Cell Research, author of the new book Mythos Christos, Edwin Herbert, Atheist Alliance of America, Atheist Republic, Godless Engineer, Kenosha Racine Atheists and Free Thinkers, and the Atheist Community of Milwaukee. Your $300 sponsorship includes a table at the conference, 1 ticket to the event, and 1 ticket to the VIP party, as well as a mention on all of our various social media platforms, including this fine podcast. Buy your tickets and sponsorships at mythicistmilwaukee.com. All of us here at Mythicist Milwaukee would like to thank all of our patrons for supporting this show. And now here's your hosts, Rob Moore and Brian Edward. Thanks for joining us again, everybody. It's another episode of the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. I'm your host, Rob Moore, the Deacon of Doubt in these parts. And joining me this week is not the normal co-host. Brian's at the Lake Estate this weekend. We have the Minister of Mythicism himself, Sean Frasick, producer extraordinaire with us. What's going on, Sean?
Not much. Brian says that's where he is, but I really think he's trying to find Pokemon.
Is that you think it is? Maybe
probably. He's in Indiana. There's probably some kind of rare forms out there. I don't know. I don't know how this game works.
I worry for his safety then more than most teenagers, and knowing his normal lapse of attention span, he's liable to get run over on the interstate.
He's going to start debating the other Pokemon Go people while he's in.
He's going to ruin it. Then he'll end the whole thing. It'll collapse because of Brian. Also, the Mythmeister himself, Antonio, is here with us. Might chime in with a question for our guest today. What's going on, Antonio?
Oh, it's going great. This is exciting to have Andrew on the show.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to it, and we might even hear from what do we dub him today? The Reverend of Rationalism, Jason Lawson, engineer. He's got a mic if he needs to stick his head in there. What's going on, Jason?
Not too much. I do like, that was one of my life's goals. Ever hearing the Hitchens take on, you can get away with anything in this country as long as you can get someone to call you Reverend. So there you go. Accomplished that.
There you go.
Yeah, well, it's
well said.
It's good to be back. It's good to have everybody on board. It's a beautiful summer day, and actually got a little rain this morning. We are talking to staff attorney today at FFRF. Andrew is he graduated cum laude. That's my official Latin, cum laude.
That was good.
I like that. From Tulane University with a BS in neuroscience. We love that, environmental science. And magna cum laude from Tulane University Law School. And he was awarded the Haber J. McCarthy Award for excellence in environmental law. Maybe we'll talk about that. I don't even know what that is, environmental law. So you got skunks and stuff coming up, possums coming up. Hey, they kicked me out of the porch the other day.
When you're in the corporate world,
looking for reparations,
environmental
I
laws,
suppose, right? Yeah. He studied human rights and international law at the University of Amsterdam. I bet that was cool. And traveled the world on semester at sea. In May of 2011, he completed his Master of Laws at Denver University Sturm College of Law with a 4.0. He's already too smart for me. I'm not even sure we should be having him on the podcast. But please welcome. He's not homicidal. He's not genocidal. He's Andrew-cidal. What's going on, Andrew?
Not much. Thank you very much for having me on.
No, thanks for joining us. You and I have, you don't really know who I am, but I know who you are because I'm involved in the Kenosha group, Kenosha Racine Atheists and Free Thinkers, that actually got started because of the Camp Timberley thing that you wrote.
Yeah.
It was probably one of the first things you did over there. Write a letter to to the school districts about that, and I ended up following up and getting them more recently to hire their own attorney to go see because we complained as a community group in Kenosha that they hadn't taken action.
Trouble.
And your original letter got ignored basically
By some school districts.
By some schools, yeah.
I mean, I can't remember the exact number. I think we wrote to maybe close to 20, school districts, and a few of them responded appropriately and said, "Yeah, we're going to stop." And then, if I remember correctly, the anti-FFRF, the Alliance Defending Freedom, sort of weighed in and said, "No, it's perfectly fine to violate students' rights. You can take them here." Yeah,
and when we reopened it, Sam over there takes care of it now, and he unfortunately had to agree that it wasn't quite up to, it wasn't violating enough apparently to take any more action than they did. Which we were so involved with the Reason Rally, I didn't follow up too much on it, but I think it's a little sketchy still, and Annie Laurie seemed to agree that maybe it was time for another look at that.
Yeah, but what is it, Rob?
Well, there's a there's a camp in East Troy, Wisconsin, where their agenda is to be a creationist
camp.
Evangelical Christian camp, and in summer they make money on kids' parents sending them there, which is all fine and good. This is America; you're allowed to do that. But unfortunately, the Kenosha School District, among many others, uses it to send kids overnight for a science trip. A couple of nights in the spring, where they don't actively teach creationism. None of us are pretending they do. But my whole bit in Kenosha, I got kids in the Kenosha School District, and you can't convince me that it's not an inappropriate use of school time. And even if they're not paying for it, they have to advertise it. It's free advertising for a camp, and if you don't get to go, if your parents don't send you, you get to stay with the 4th grade class. And what really irks me is there's the orchestra leader in Kenosha school districts is also on the board of the camp. So there's a real conflict there. He goes around lecturing, teaching kids creationism. One of those guys.
Yeah.
So anyway, we don't want to take up the whole show on that, but that's the background at Timberley, and that's how we know who Andrew is. He's since kind of a bigwig, and is not. Tell us, you've been at FFRF, Andrew, since 11. Were you like basically the first attorney they hired after any lawyer? Did it go for? Because I know you're like a bigwig now, and you got little guys doing your work. There's really only a handful of lawyers over there still.
Yeah, no, we have 5 attorneys. I was not the first attorney hired. I was actually the 3rd attorney hired. Okay. We have 5 now. We've had a couple come and go since then. But we have 5 full-time attorneys. We have 2 legal fellows. And then right now we have 5 interns, all law school interns. And then we also have a legal assistant and an intake assistant now. So our legal staff has been growing really quickly, it's one of the bigger parts of FFRF. Last year we got 5,000 state church complaints. And there are 5 attorneys able to handle this. So the workload is pretty ridiculous. But it's a job I absolutely love, and I really, really believe in it. So it's a lot of fun.
Well, to me, you're a hero. I mean, this is a real patriot, the guy who's doing what he's doing out there. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you probably could get a higher paying job at a law firm with more prestige, taking on criminal cases or doing something like that. But it's this is a little bit more altruistic and something that the country desperately needs. So thank you for all your work there.
And, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, let me throw a thank you in for that. That was a great plug.
Really amazing, and it's fantastic for me to talk to anybody from FFRF. I'm on the atheist side of the whole bit that we do here. Really involved with violations of the Establishment Clause. Tell us about Mississippi, maybe for one, or what's been the big violations lately that you've been going after?
Actually, lately I've been really doing a lot of work in Kentucky. The Ken Ham, who I'm sure you all know, the creationist who opened the creationist, you can't see my air quotes, but air quotes museum in Kentucky, has now opened his monument to ignorance, the Ark Park, also in Kentucky. And that's been kind of a big problem for us. And it's actually generated a lot of other complaints. So we knew this was going to be an issue because we've had reports of public schools taking their students to the Creation Museum. So it's kind of, pretty similar to Camp Timberley. You can't take kids to be indoctrinated at a place that preaches creationism. Can't do it. Not constitutionally anyway. Since we got reports of public schools going there, we figured the same thing was going to happen with this Ark Park. So to avoid that, we wrote to just about every school district in a 100-mile radius of the Ark Park. So every school district in Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, Indiana, Ohio. So there ended up being just shy of 1,400 letters that we sent out explaining why public school districts can't take their students to the Ark Park. And that sort of set off this big snowball of issues that have had me tied up in Kentucky for the past 2 weeks, battling Ken Ham, who knows absolutely nothing about the Constitution, or as much about the Constitution as he does about biology and evolution, I guess.
It seems Ken Ham doesn't really care about what the Constitution says because his Constitution comes from the Bible. So that's really his angle. And from that point, he's also been discriminating, workers as well. You have to be a creationist to even work there. And they've obviously taken subsidies from the government.
Yeah, and another one of the attorneys I work with, Patrick Elliott, has really been following the money on this case and just wrote a great, very short, simple blog that follows the money for Free Thought Now, FFRF's blog, which is on the Patheos website. So if anybody's interested in exactly what kind of money the Arc Park is getting and where that money is coming from, they should go read that blog. It's pretty interesting. They also got things that people don't talk about, some really interesting local tax issues, and basically were gifted the land almost for free. So there's other things going on that people don't even realize that are problematic there. And you're absolutely right. You're taking public money and public subsidies or getting refunds on your taxes for that, and being able to discriminate presents a huge, huge problem. And the fascinating thing about this is actually that the state said Ken Ham couldn't do that. And Ken Ham turned around and sued. And at the federal district court level, a judge said, no, Ken Ham can get that. And that decision is wrong. Okay, that decision is absolutely wrong. But in the interim, Kentucky had an election and a new governor was elected who is sympathetic to Ken Ham. And so instead of that case being appealed as it would and should have been in the normal course of things, the governor stopped that case and refused to appeal that bad decision. So we're kind of stuck with it for a little while. Not that it can't be challenged later in a different way, but for the moment, it stands.
Did you get to go inside the Ark? Did you learn any?
No, so I didn't
science?
actually. I didn't get to go to the opening, but I wrote that letter, the memo to all these different school districts. Annie, Lori, and Dan signed it, and we sent it out to these almost 1,400 school districts. And then we actually got a report shortly after the letter went out that 2 school districts had already taken their students to the Arc Park.
Wow.
So this happened. It actually happened before our memo went out. So our memo went out on Wednesday, the same day the park opened, and they had taken their bands. These 2 high schools, local high schools, took their bands to the park. And apparently what happened is Ken Ham solicited these bands to come play at the opening.
Oh,
the
so
marching,
they actually
the marching
performed.
bands. They actually performed. And if you saw any of the ribbon cutting ceremony, it was really incredibly religious. They had prayers there, obviously. They had this stacking of the stones, 12 stones, where they were reenacting a biblical story.
Nice.
And these kids were using, their band equipment, their band flags. They had T-shirts that the Arc Park made for them. And apparently we've just got another report on late Friday that I still have to address. Apparently they were also given free tickets to go to the Arc Park again later on if they wanted, as sort of payment. So you have basically the public school system sort of in bed with Ken Ham, and that creates a big, big problem too, obviously.
What have some of the responses been to the memos that you've sent?
So we've had a couple kind of across the spectrum. One superintendent emailed back and said, fine, I'll take them there with my own money and organize it without being a superintendent, which is also problematic. So we'll be watching him. And then one actually was sarcastic, and it's like, oh, shucks, we can't go there. That's a shame. So a couple of the superintendents contacted the Commissioner for Education for the state of Kentucky. So this is the head honcho for all Kentucky public schools. And under Kentucky law, he has a duty to make sure that those schools follow the law. It specifically says that in his statutory duties. But he issued an opinion to these superintendents that basically said, well, field trips should be left up to the local schools and they shouldn't be dictated to by third parties. So he kind of basically abandoned his statutory duty to ensure that these schools, abide by the Constitution. So we wrote him a letter too and explained to him what his duties are under the Kentucky statute. And then we also said, by the way, we're not dictating this. This is what the Constitution requires of public schools. The First Amendment applies to all these public schools, regardless of where they are or who is saying it. So, you need to do a better job of explaining to your schools what is and is not allowed. So that was the opening of the Arc Park. Ken Ham got pretty pissed at us too. He was very upset, and he actually responded. I don't know. Did you guys get a chance to see it at all?
I saw some of the tweets. I think he had sent out a really nasty tweet.
Yeah, well, several really nasty tweets.
Yeah.
And then he decided that he would offer all public schools that want to take their students there. He'll charge them only $1 per student, and the adults can get in for free. So this is going to be a big problem this year, I think, and I would not be at all surprised if we end up seeing a lawsuit as a result of this. And Ken Ham, when he made that offer, he did this huge rebuttal of our memo. And the thing that was really fascinating about it was that he didn't cite a single court case. There's absolutely no law that he cited. He just made these pretty much like his creationism. He has no evidence to back up his claims. He's just baldly stating them as though they are truth. And he's absolutely wrong.
Now, do you think he's a true believer or a con man?
Bill Nye, I watched an interview with him where he was, I think he was actually talking with Bill Maher about Ken Ham. And Bill Nye said that, he kind of went into it thinking that he was a con man, but ends up believing that he probably is a true believer. So I'll trust Bill Nye on this one, at least until I have a chance to meet Ken Ham. But to me, that's a perennial question that I think certainly some of these guys, especially some of these mega preachers, are definitely con men, and they know they're shoveling nonsense, but they don't care about it. But then, how do you, and does it even matter? I mean, I think it does matter, I guess, but
I just wonder. It fascinates me if anyone is a con man, how they can actually. I guess I get how they could live with themselves, but how can you? I don't know. How do you keep it up? It just fascinates me.
It really is interesting.
I tend to think you'd have to be a true believer. I just don't know who could have the dedication to run that kind of long-term scam. And
if you ever read Elmer Gantry too, I think that I always go back to that. I kind of feel like Lewis nailed it in that book and really kind of the mindset. So,
is it fair to say you are an Ark Park narc?
Yeah, I think I'm going to get a T-shirt made now. I think, yeah.
Nice, right? Thank you. I'll take credit for that.
Yeah, you should.
What else is going on, Sean?
So the biggest thing is, and that's, obviously we are secularists and we know a lot of atheists and our friends are atheists, but you really don't understand the entire scope of what FFRF and what Andrew does on a daily basis and where it's needed. I mean, Andrew, if you can talk to, I read your blog on the pastor Robert Jeffress. Am I saying that correct? Yeah. So where he cites Romans 13:4 and states that law enforcement are ministers of God sent by God to punish evildoers. And not only that, the police cars in Harper, Kansas actually had this passage like as a decal on their car. I mean, this is, when you think about law enforcement, you should totally assume that they're not religiously affiliated, but they are in this case.
Yeah, it's a problem we've been seeing a lot more of. Even in Polk County, Florida, we have a sheriff down there who is preaching in church on Sundays in his full dress uniform using his title sheriff, and he preached on Romans 13:4 too. And to me, it's a big problem. I mean, first of all, it lacks a basic understanding about American government and the way we operate. So for instance, in Romans 13, it says that the authorities that exist are established by God. And it's fundamentally opposed to our system of government. The Constitution says we the people. Those are the first three words. And if you look at the document, they're pretty heavily emphasized. It's not God that establishes the authorities. It's we the people that do under our system. And, our Constitution is notably godless. It's an entirely secular document. The only references to religion are exclusionary, to keep religion out of government. And to kind of have your law enforcement, the people charged with upholding the law lack that basic understanding is alarming. And especially when you say that they're put there by God to punish evildoers, which is not at all the role of law enforcement. Law enforcement, they enforce the law. They don't punish people for violating the law. That's the judicial system. And the founders actually have a thing that they enshrined in our Constitution called the separation of powers. So again, there's this fundamental misunderstanding that's encapsulated in Romans 13:4 that you have the people charged with enforcing our laws preaching, and it's really disturbing to me. So it's a very bad thing to be putting on police cars. Aside from the fact that it actually violates the First Amendment, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of how our system operates.
Well, it goes further. Aren't there other towns that have more kind of obliquely put "In God We Trust" on their squad cars upstate?
There are many towns that have done that, yeah. And, this is, "In God We Trust" is one of those things that eventually it's going to come down, and eventually it's going to get struck down as our national motto. The only reason courts have allowed "In God We Trust" to remain our national motto for the time being is because they've said that through rote repetition, that phrase has lost all its religious meaning. And to me, there's just a huge element of religious hypocrisy in that decision. If a court were to tell Christians that John 3:16 has lost all its religious meaning because they've said it so much, the Christians in this country would freak out. That judge would be lynched or at the very least impeached almost immediately. And they would be wrong to make that decision. But because it's not a decision against the Christian majority and it allows the Christian majority to impose their religion on everybody, they don't have a problem with it. They're perfectly willing to say, yeah, it's not religious, and then wink and nudge each other as they stick it up on every piece of government property they can find. So to me, it's just, whenever I see that, I just think, man, the Christian majority in this country is so hypocritical. So to me, those are just big monuments and markers to Christian hypocrisy.
Would you put that argument under the same argument for the Pledge of Allegiance, where, under God is still stated weekly in every elementary school district that I can think of in this country?
I would. And the decisions court-wise are a little bit better there because, in the Barnett case, the Supreme Court actually decided that, kids can't be forced to say the Pledge of Allegiance and they can't be forced to stand for it, which also by extension means that kids can not say under God if they don't want to. I still think it's a problem and I still think it ought to be removed. I don't think it's quite as bad. And there's actually a really fascinating history on the legal side of that fight that I think would stand as a good example for the secular movement. So the Supreme Court in that decision, I think it was 1943, it was the Barnett case where they said, yeah, you can't force kids to say this. 3 years before that, they actually made the exact opposite decision where they said that, yes, kids can be forced to say the pledge and that they can be punished if they don't.
Wow.
And in the interim, there was such a backlash, and there was actually also a good amount of violence towards Jehovah's Witnesses their kids were still refusing to stand, even though they were required to, that in just 3 years, the Supreme Court changed its mind. So, one of the things we often hear about is we're going to win this in court, and we're going to win the separation of state and church in court, and the secular movement's going to advance its goals in court. And that's true to a certain extent, but, you can also do it, and you can change the way courts are going to decide sort of through a social movement. And it's one of the reasons that the number one thing I tell people when they say, how can I help, is I tell them, just come out of the closet. Just don't be afraid of saying that you're an atheist. That's the number one thing you can do to help this movement after joining FFRF, of course.
It really is. If you just wear T-shirts around, it's incredible the looks you get. And again, being from New England, it never seemed like a big deal. But boy, when you get into conservative parts of the country and the Kentuckys and the Texases and so forth, and the Milwaukees out there, it's just foreign to people. And atheism might as well be Martian.
Yeah. Well, I think it's even more ironic that the police officers are putting, Romans 13:4 in their police cards. I mean, what if they cited Leviticus, where you can rape a woman as long as you pay her father 30 pieces of silver? You can put that, and you're going to put that on the side of a car. I mean, there's so many passages that are like evil, just terrible. But yeah, you guys successfully got them to remove those decals in Kansas. Is that correct?
That is correct. I wrote a letter to the police chief explaining some of the conflicts, both with the First Amendment by displaying that, and then the ideas in that passage, how they conflict with our Constitution from a sort of a principle standpoint. And they, to their credit, they removed the decals a couple of days later. So that was a solid victory. We haven't had as much success with the In God We Trust decals. We did also get cross decals removed from police. I think they were actually sheriff's vehicles in Brewster County, Texas. And that, we ended up having to sue over that one, and it cost the county $20,000 before they ended up settling with us and did what we asked them to do in the first place, which, if you get a letter from FFRF, anybody out there listening, just do what we're asking so that we don't have to sue you. It makes life easier for everybody.
You heard it here, I think. I agree with that sentiment.
Yeah, and then you can take care of more cases as they come up.
But I mean, that's like the scope of all. I mean, there's so many conflicts and so many cases where, the separation of church and state is just being ignored blatantly by governments.
Oh, it's a real problem. I mean, again, we got 5,000 complaints last year alone, and not all of those end up being violations, but a good chunk of them are. A huge percentage of them are. And then of those that do end up being violations, about half of those are in the public schools. So it really is a big problem. We could go back to Kentucky just last week. I got a call from a woman who wanted to get married in the county courthouse in Trigg County, Kentucky. And the judge there, so it's actually like the county executive, so it's more like a mayor of the county. The judge, she had the whole wedding ceremony ready to go. She had the license. She talked to the clerk. Everything was ready to go. Her and her husband were going to show up this coming Friday and get married at the courthouse. And then the next day they were going to have their own private ceremony with family and friends. So they would already technically be married. And at the end of kind of getting all these details sorted out, she asked the clerk, she said, "Oh, and by the way, my husband and I aren't religious and we want a non-religious ceremony." And the clerk was kind of a little bit uncomfortable with that, but didn't say anything and got off the phone. And then 10 minutes later, she got a call back from this judge, Hollis Alexander, who said, "I include God in all my ceremonies. And if you aren't going to have that, you can go get married somewhere else."
Wow.
Yeah.
Hey, Andrew, a question that's always been of high interest to me, and perhaps you can answer it. Why is it that churches or religious groups here in this country get tax exempted? Why is that still allowed? Why can entities like yourself not force them to enter into paying taxes?
So, and this has been challenged, and the reason is basically because the Supreme Court has said so. And essentially in that decision, the Supreme Court said that tax exemption has existed for so long, and it's this tradition, and it predates this country, and it's extended to all kinds of other nonprofits like FFRF, like the ACLU, like nonprofits that help people learn how to read, that help people get medical attention, all these different nonprofits that help. The court said that it's okay to extend it to churches in that instance as well. I think that's a little bit problematic, mostly because I don't think churches help people. And I think that if they are setting up a soup kitchen, then that soup kitchen should go ahead and be tax exempt. But that, the church itself should be taxed. There is another argument too, which is that the separation of state and church kind of works both ways. It's a wall that keeps religion out of government and keeps government out of religion. So that therefore we shouldn't have the government taxing churches for that reason. Not a lot of people in our movement buy that, but some do. I'm personally a little bit ambivalent about that. I think I would like to see churches that are doing genuine charity work set up separate charities and have those be tax exempt. And that's it.
So one of the things that's been coming up lately is the state's RFRAs, the Religious Freedom Restoration Acts. I noticed you had posted a blog on that. What are we seeing with the conflict there?
The basic problem with these Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, and they're all based on the federal Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or RFRA. The basic problem with these is that they elevate one individual's religious belief above the law and allow them to be exempt from the law. And that is just a huge problem in terms of the Constitution and the separation of state and church. And we've been working to undermine and challenge these laws where possible. The Mississippi law just got struck down. The Indiana law was probably the law that really brought this into the national spotlight, the law that Pence signed into law. And it's a really... To me, these are a really big problem, but I think the focus is always on, well, is this one worse or is that one worse? And to me, they're all problematic. They all elevate one individual's personal religious belief, which, is not based on science. It's not based on fact. It's not based on evidence. It's based on faith. So it's kind of one of the weakest, worst ideas you can have. We're saying, yeah, that gets exempted from the law. And the Supreme Court actually addressed this back in the 1870s, and they said, can we exempt one individual like this? And they firmly came down on the side of, no, we absolutely can't. And that was in the U.S. versus Reynolds case. But since then, sort of as a backlash to a few of the Supreme Court's decisions in the 90s, there's been this push for, quote, religious freedom. And what it really is a way to redefine religious freedom. And it's sort of codifying religious privilege of the majority over some of the minorities. And in my mind, it's a huge problem, and it's going to be a big fight that we're going to be having down the road for a number of years to come.
Please go to mythicistmilwaukee.com and buy a membership. Do it today so that we can keep bringing you the number 14 rated religious podcast on iTunes. Congratulations, guys. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, we forgot to talk about that.
We wanted to plug ourselves a little bit, pat ourselves on the back there.
Yeah.
And thank you, Andrew, as well, for plugging that as well on your Twitter account.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Bizarre timing, but we'll take it, Rob.
He's at Andrew L. Seidel, and he is a Twitter magnate, man. He's got 12,000 followers, and he only bothers to follow 95. I just followed you myself, Andrew. I am at Robinero.
Thank you.
I'll expect to follow back.
No, that's not going to happen. He's only following 59 people, and you are not one of them.
Well, I'll just unfollow him then.
Oh, Twitter.
Oh, that Twitter. And we are, of course, at
Twitter.
Mythicist MKE. You can tweet us anytime with comments, questions, suggestions for the show. Coming up in October, of course, the big guy himself, Dan Barker, joining us to speak at Myth Information Conference 3, October 21st. Get your tickets now. Are you going to be in attendance, Andrew, for that?
I would definitely like to come over for that. It's going to depend a little bit on the FFRF convention and whether or not I'm going to that. I think yours is a couple weeks before that, and our run up to the convention is just super crazy.
Right.
And especially when the convention's not in Madison. This year we're going to be in Pittsburgh. It's just like the 3 weeks or 2 weeks before it's just, it's 80-hour weeks and no sleep. And then you get to go present at the convention and try to sound intelligent. It's very fun. But I really am very interested in the show you guys are going to put on. So I would love to make it over there for it.
Yeah, we'd love to have you, but if Ken Ham pulls anything else out of mythology and decides to build it, and
we understand
that might
we need you on the front lines.
That might take up some more of your time there.
Yeah, he's monopolizing my time a little bit these days.
Of course, that conference is going to culminate in the big debate between Doctors Robert Price and Bart Ehrman on the historicity of Jesus. Do you have a thought on mythicism, Andrew? Do you pay any attention to that? Are you too busy?
I haven't. I don't have a final verdict yet. I'm still looking. I just finished Ehrman's book a couple weeks ago, and I was actually chatting with Dan Barker about this at the office the other day. And I think I'm probably going to end up having to come up with a sort of probability. But right now, I'm leaning towards a very low probability that it was a real person.
Yeah. That's great.
The jury for me is still out a little bit, but I also think it doesn't matter because there's zero chance he was divine or born of a virgin or died and was resurrected or is a god. And somebody who claims they're a god is not my cup of tea.
Yeah. Just a crazy person, probably. Just a mentally ill person, a bag lady.
Right.
Pretty much.
Jesus, the bag lady.
I don't know if you want to do myth of the day before we get into
It's about that time.
Topic.
Mythmeister is
next topic's pretty heavy.
Here. Take it away, Antonio, with myth of the day.
Well, thank you again, Andrew, for being on the show. And today's myth of the day be connected to the Islamic text, the Quran. This will relate to the oppression of women in this case. In the Quran in Surah 2:28 says, "Wives have the same rights as the husbands have on them in accordance with the generally known principles. Of course, men are a degree above them in status." In another piece of the Quran, it states that a male gets a double share of the inheritance over that of a female. Specifically, Surah 4:11 states, "The share of the male shall be twice that of a female." And in hell, it is stated as well that there are more women in hell than men. And that is our myth of the day.
Wait, so there are more women in hell than men.
Yeah.
But there are 70 virgins for every jihadi in hell.
Right.
The math doesn't work.
Well, that's why I like that. Well, I like the Family Guy where it talks about the 72 virgins and it's actually a bunch of computer scientists that are up there, male, introverts.
Dorks.
Yeah.
I'll specifically quote it here for you, Andrew. It says, "The prophet said, I looked at paradise and found poor people farming the majority of its inhabitants. And I looked at hell and saw that the majority of its inhabitants were women."
Right. And that comes on the back end of the witnesses that saw Muhammad descend into hell, and there were 3 people, but only equate to 2 witnesses because the 2 women that were there only amount to 1 witness because they're half a person. So that's part of it as well.
A hero descending into the underworld. Where else have I heard that?
Right, exactly. Heard it over and over.
Well, here, I'll quote that one as well, since you brought it up as well, Sean. In the Quran, in Surah 2:82, it states, "And let 2 men from among you bear witness to all such documents. But if 2 men be not available, there should be 1 man and 2 women to bear witness, so that if 1 woman forgets, the other may remind her."
Right. Yeah, that's
Nice.
That's great. Wow. So one of the things that we wanted to bring up, because current issue, is the attacks in Nice, France. Yeah. So Mohamed Bouhel drives a truck into the crowd at Bastille Days and kills 84 people. Telegraph, the UK Telegraph, actually just reported that ISIS finally claimed responsibility for the attack. And one of the other things that came out was French Prime Minister Manuel Valls states, France must learn to live with terrorism. So it's a really defeatist comment, and he's getting some flack on that. So, what is your take and FFRF's take on this? Like, what can be done to kind of stop this style of terrorism moving forward?
Well, I don't know. I mean, from a security standpoint, I don't know how you stop that style of terrorism, but I do know that no progress is going to be made unless we address the root problem, which is clearly religion. And kind of the disconnected nature of these attacks, to me, that is also evidence that it is very clearly religion that is motivating them. You have the San Bernardino shooter and then the Nice, and their responsibility is only claimed afterwards. They're being radicalized on their own without really having contact with ISIS, back in the Middle East. So that means the common thread sort of across all of these is Islam. And for us not to be saying that is only making the problem worse. People who believe that they are going to get 72 computer geeks in the afterlife, that there is a better afterlife waiting for them, that their beliefs should be spread with violence if necessary. Those beliefs, those have consequences. Religion is nothing more than a set of ideas, and all of our ideas have consequences for our actions. And this is a particularly virulent strain of ideology, and it has real world consequences. And for us not to step up and say, yes, we need to confront that ideology is, I think, a big problem.
And that's what I love about what FFRF does. You guys are constantly confronting this, and and you'll have someone like the Colbert Report, I believe, giving you guys a little bit of grief for doing it. But I mean, it's all these little things that add up to that, and I applaud you guys for your work that you do every day. And I think in the topic of religion, too many people don't want to talk about it, and that's part of the problem. Those that are extremists are actually talking about it and planning around it, but those that don't belong to that type of ideology aren't talking about it. I think that's also part of the problem. The fact that it's so taboo that we can't discuss it. Hillary Clinton comes out and states that this is the work of a extremist jihadist group instead of saying a fundamental Islamist group. What is a moderate jihadist group? I don't know. Why can't we just call it what it is and say this is extremist version of Islam that we're seeing play out?
Well, and I think that is part of the problem. We can't call it what it is because religion has done a great job over, not just recently, but over the millennia of holding itself as above common discourse, as this set of ideas that can't be challenged in any way, shape, or form, and that to do so is so offensive as to be worthy of punishment in many cases, which is an idea we're just sort of escaping in our recent past. And that unwillingness to challenge religious ideas is part of the reason that it is taboo to even talk about the religious influence on terrorism. And that is a big problem. So, just being an out atheist and being critical of religious ideas is incredibly important.
And let me say it twice. Thank you for what you do. You risk every single day for what you do.
Tell us, as an attorney, what do you make of the civil unrest in America these days, specifically the Black Lives Matter and the uprisings against the the police? Does it kind of does it make us seem like whiners as atheists looking for some attention on our civil rights movement, or what do you make of that? What's the solution there?
Oh, I wish I knew the solution. I think right now there's a serious problem with escalation. I don't know if you saw the reports out of Baton Rouge this morning or not, but it sounds like things are getting worse instead of getting better. And I do not know how to fix race relations in this country, but I don't think it should detract us from any of our other goals. Historically, religion has been an enormous problem in race relations in this country. The vast majority of every justification for slavery and segregation were religious justifications. There's actually a really great book. I can't remember the author's name right now, but I think it's called America Aflame. And it talks about religion's influence in leading up to the Civil War and what religion did at that point. It was kind of the first time in the 1840s that religion really started getting involved in American politics, and religious rhetoric sort of invaded the halls of government. And it polarized the country, the nation, so much that it made a peaceful solution to the slavery problem impossible. It turned it into this issue where it was, my way, God is on my side, so you are 100% wrong, and made it impossible to find a peaceful solution to it. It's a really interesting read. Don't know how right he is, but it's really got me thinking and looking at our current state, and a little bit more understanding on all sides, I think, would be helpful, and a little less religion on just about every issue everywhere would be a little more helpful.
Key to all society's problems, right? Getting rid of religion. We can start right there.
It would certainly help. I don't know if it would fix everything, but it is. It's holding us back on so many issues. And it's one of the reasons that I actually switched from environmental law to doing the work that I do now, is I get to have an impact on so many other areas, LGBT rights, human rights, also environmental law, just in doing the work that I'm doing. And there are about, 10 or 15,000 pro-environment lawyers out there doing that kind of work. And there are about 12 or 14 lawyers who do the work that I do at FFRF. I know them all. We talk all the time. So I'm having a much bigger impact, I think, in this work than I was, doing environmental law.
I think that's the situation we're in. It's a tough predicament that atheists are in, because you see all these atrocities that are happening as a result of religion, and in a lot of cases it's fundamental religion. But then also you have, the stuff that misses the radar, the stuff that happens underneath what we see in the major media. We saw the the Pakistani Kim Kardashian was just killed in an honor killing. You see all of these atrocities happening, Nice, Orlando, all these things. The problem is when we then challenge these ideas, we get called out by others that are more moderately religious, the people that aren't fundamental, but they say they see the value in religion. But when we're calling this stuff out, they're saying, "What's wrong with you? Stop calling them out. You're a bully, this and that." And it's like, you're really in a tough spot. It's like a lose-lose. What do you do?
It is, but I think you have to soldier on. I think you have to continue to criticize religion. It is a fundamental right that we all have, and it's the only way to start to take down that taboo that we've been talking about, is to continue to criticize religion and religious ideas and the impact that it has. And yeah, we're going to catch a lot of flack for it, and we're going to get blowback from time to time. But in my mind, that just means that we're doing something right.
Andrew, were you always okay speaking out against religion, or did you get more strength when you joined FFRF?
I really became out and open about my atheism and my desire to keep state and church separate in law school. I was in Iceland with my girlfriend at the time. We were driving around Iceland, and she was reading The God Delusion in the passenger seat. And she's like, "You got to read this book. You're gonna absolutely love it. You're gonna love it." And starts reading parts of it out to me. And I was playing devil's advocate. We're attorneys, we do that all the time. And trying to rebut Dawkins's arguments. Every time I said it, she's like, "No, he addressed that one. He addressed it here." And she would read it again. And after reading that, kind of that with the confluence of me learning about the Constitution and the separation of state and church and the First Amendment in law school really galvanized me to stand up for these issues and for what I believe is right in this. So I actually have Dawkins to thank for it, really.
Well, where did you come from before that? Were you raised religious?
No, I wasn't raised religious at all. My mom encouraged me to go to temple with my Jewish friends and kind of explore. And it became very, very obvious to me early on that these mutually exclusive claims of truth could not all be right, and that the most obvious answer was that they were all wrong. So I don't think I ever really believed in a God. I just didn't adopt the label atheist and start talking about it, and wasn't afraid to call myself that until my first year of law school.
Tell us about the book. When's it coming out? What's it going to be called? What's going to be in the pages?
So don't have a date from the publisher yet. I'm hoping to get that really soon. The wait is agonizing. But the book is, I'm trying to end the argument about whether or not we're a Christian nation. And I'm doing that by, rather than playing defensive, I'm going on the offensive. So, the claim that we're founded as a Christian nation, I think most people in the secular movement can refute that. But the fallback claim is that what I really mean is we're founded on Judeo-Christian principles. The Constitution embodies Judeo-Christian principles, and that idea is much more difficult to refute and to take down. So that is what I do in this book. And I go through each of the 10 commandments and compare them to the founding principles and what the founders thought. Talk about the religion of the founders, talk about in God we trust, one nation under God, all that kind of stuff. And basically highlight biblical principles, compare them to principles our nation was founded on, and arrive at the conclusion that they are in such conflict that it's fair to say that Christianity is un-American.
Nice. I can't wait to read that.
Yeah,
it
that
sounds like it's right
great.
in line with Wes Cecil's work, who we just had on the Tuesday night discussion group, as far as
Looking at the early colonies.
that topic.
Yeah.
And he makes the same point and points out that the writers of the Constitution and the early documents were basing that largely on the teachings of Cicero, not
Right.
not
way
Jesus.
more educated than the rest of the population. That's
Right.
Yeah, and if you actually read through the Federalist Papers, they're pretty clear about that. They rarely touch on anything biblical. And so the Federalist Papers were, they're an exposition on what the Constitution does and why it does what it does. And this was to convince New York to ratify the Constitution so that we could actually become the United States. And, they never really talk about the Bible or anything in the Bible, but they are constantly talking about ancient Greece and
Right.
Rome
mm-hmm.
and that really early time. It's very, very clear if you read those that that's where they got most of their ideas from.
Yeah, very, very philosophical approach to the whole doctrine.
Right.
Yeah.
And if it weren't for the sort of deistic references to a creator, we probably wouldn't even have to deal with with the kind of arguments that we do now that it's a Christian nation. I just don't think they had a better idea. Or what's your thought on that language, the creator language in the?
So I go through actually each of the references in the Declaration of Independence and talk about where it came from. And I actually also have Jefferson's rough draft language in there, because only one of those references was in his original rough draft. And the others one was added by Franklin or Adams during the editing process. And then the other two at the end, Divine Providence and the Supreme Judge of the World, were added on by the committee as a whole. At the very, very last moment. So they weren't integral to the document by any stretch of the imagination. They're basically just this deistic window dressing added at the end. And when Jefferson was talking about the laws of nature and nature's God, that was the one that he had in the original. And that's often held up as, this is specifically saying that our rights come from God. But the laws of nature and nature's God were not the idea of a Christian God.
Right.
It was very much natural law that he was talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you touch on Thomas Paine at all?
I do. I love me some T-Pain.
Yeah,
He's
so do I.
just the man.
He's great.
What can you tell us, Andrew, about the relationship that our current representatives, whether it be Congress, mayors, any other public official, the relationship that they have with FFRF? It could even be our new candidates, like Mike Pence, for instance. That might be an extreme example. But what's the relationship that Congress has with FFRF?
So FFRF is nonpartisan. We've gone to Congress to lobby them on certain issues, but we don't endorse candidates. We don't prefer one party over the other, and we don't encourage people to vote one way or another. But we do address issues, and we are completely able to talk about issues such as evolution, denying evolution, saying that creationism should be taught in public schools, which apparently is Mike Pence's stance. And we have worked with members of Congress on other issues. For instance, FFRF's congressional rep, the Madison, Wisconsin congressional rep, is Mark Pocan, and he asked if Dan Barker, FFRF co-president, could give the opening invocation to the House of Representatives. This happens about 40% of the time a guest gives the opening prayer. The chaplain of the House refused to allow Dan to give it because he's an atheist. And the reason we asked was because the Supreme Court decided 2 years ago that government prayer was allowed so long as the opportunity to give the prayer was open to anyone, including a layperson and an atheist. And that was their language. That's what they chose to say. So the chaplain's in direct conflict with the Supreme Court, and we actually have sued the House of Representatives because of that.
And while you don't endorse as an organization any representative, has any representative endorsed FFRF? Any congressman or woman?
I guess not as such. When Ann Gaylor, who was the FFRF founder, died, there was some really nice language entered into the congressional record about her service and what she's done her life, both at the Wisconsin legislature and in the U.S. House of Representatives. So that's probably, I guess, the closest we've come. Our job when we're policing the separation of state and church is, the law says, the First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So we're fundamentally policing Congress. That's what we do. We police Congress, we police mayors. All government officials are people that we are going up against in the course of our duties. So I think more often than not, they don't like what we're doing.
Andrew Seidel, thanks so much for joining us. He is staff attorney at FFRF, author, photographer, Renaissance man, and a true patriot and hero.
Hey, guys, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, this was a fantastic show. Thank you.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it.
Yep.
Yeah, and next time I'll come in the studio. I'll come over and we'll do it for real.
That'd be great.
Sounds good.
That'd be great.
Thanks
Bye.
for joining us again, everybody. It's been the podcast that puts God last. The Mythicist Milwaukee Show. Check us next week when we have Reggie Finley. Sounds British, no? He's the infidel guy. Just sounds British. Reggie Finley, a.k.a. the infidel guy, next week on the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. Good afternoon, everybody. The Mythicist Milwaukee Show is brought to you by Mythicist Milwaukee. Producer Sean Frasek. Associate producer Melanie Lawson. Engineer Jason Lawson. Mythmeister Antonio Blandone. Researcher Kristen Whitaker-Hood. Closing theme written and performed by Shelley Siegel. On behalf of co-host Brian Edward and the entire team, I'm Rob Moore reminding you to keep it safe and keep it secular.